All right. I promise I will make this less shorter than 10 minutes. So let's look at chapter 8 in Interplay. It's all about listening. And as you're reading this and thinking about it, I want you to really focus on yourself. And uh, so you can figure out what your listening skills are like. Okay. So, the nature of listening, very, very interestingly, they say that listening is the most frequent form of communication activity, and yet, when you think about it, so we've got reading, writing, listening, speaking. The one that you do the most is the skill that actually gets taught the least. You probably do writing, well, these days students maybe do reading less than any other, but writing is tends to be the skill that students do least frequently, and yet it's the one that gets the most time in the classroom. I just thought that was interesting. Okay. Second point, listening is defined as the process of receiving and responding to others' messages. And as the textbook says, traditional approaches focus on the reception of spoken messages. However, we've broadened the definition to include messages of all sorts because much of contemporary listening takes place through mediated channels. And then they say, so keep that in mind. However, when they go through the rest of the text, they do have a tendency to focus on spoken. And what I really like this, the Chinese character that is listening, but look what goes into it: the ears, the eyes, the heart, and undivided attention. And I think to me that's absolutely perfect, because that's what I'm going to use a bad word, what we'll talk about in chapter 9. That's what listening should be. Should's the bad word, by the way. Okay. And just want you to make sure that you are clear that there is a difference between hearing and listening. Hearing has to do with the sound wave, that's the sound wave striking the eardrum. That's the physiological, what's going on in your body. And then listening is when you take that process and you give it meaning. Okay. The next part with the would you say, are you overall a mindful listener or a mindless listening? Or I should rephrase that, because we all do both. Can you think about times when you do more mindless listening than mindful listening? And I think it might be interesting to consider. Remember way back when we talked about what would be the difference between an interpersonal communication and impersonal communication? And do you think there's a connection with that concept with the mindless and mindful listening? Now, obviously, if we were to listen mindfully 100% of the time, we'd have a lot of problems, because it is exhausting to give it. Think about that: your eyes, your ears, your heart, and undivided attention. Okay, just something I think we could talk about in class also. Okay, we all use different listening styles, but we also use some people use different styles more than others. I don't think I really need to go over this in great detail, I hope, but okay. Task-oriented listening is when you are listening to complete a task, hence task-oriented. Relational listening is when you are listening because what you want to do is build emotional closeness. Analytical listening it's a judging, not being judgmental, but judging the message to say, for example, is this message on target? This is something that when I taught public speaking, I spent a lot of time doing analytical listening to the whole message and then saying, okay, well, I did both analytical and critical listening, where critical listening is to evaluate the components. So in critical listening, I would be saying, okay, what is the person talking about in the speech? And the analytical listening was to, listen to the whole thing and then kind of craft my response to give them feedback. So think about when you use each of these styles and if you have a go-to. And has anyone seen Ozark? My sister told me I should watch it, and I don't know. Give me your feedback. Okay. Why are we perhaps not good listeners? One, we are bombarded with information all the time, so it's hard to listen. Two, we have things on our mind, and when we are struggling, when we're dealing with issues, it's hard to listen to someone else. Also, this I find fascinating, the rapid thoughts. People can understand speech rates up to 600 words per minute, but the average person speaks between 120 and 150 words per minute. Also, there is noise, both. Remember when we talked about noise in chapter 1, where we said it can be actual physical noise, but it can be psychological noise that's getting in the way. And textbook took this out. I think this was in the 13th, maybe 14th edition. We in the United States live in a society that tends to value speaking more than listening, which I refer to when we were talking about language. Okay, let's look at some poor listening behaviors, and I'm going to guess that you maybe do all of these or some of these, but what I would like you to do when you look at this section in the chapter is figure out which of these, what's your go-to poor listening habit? And if it's situational, you would say, okay, I do pseudo listening when I'm in the classroom. And I do insulated listening when I'm talking with my grandmother and she is telling me the same stuff over and over again. So you read that section and then bring your ideas to class. What I would like you to do for this section, the components of listening, is think about how this information, maybe I'm reaching, but I see a big connection between this and the steps in the perception process. So tell me what you think. There's a concept that the chapter talks about called listening fidelity, which has to do with, let's see, is there a connection between what we understand and what was the message being sent? Because sometimes we say, yeah, we understood it all, and it turns out for whatever reason we did not. Okay, and I'm going to do a little exercise on remembering, because it is fascinating that people remember only about half of what they hear immediately. Within 2 months, they forget 50%. And that brings it down to 25% of the original message. Okay, think about what that means to you in terms of being in class that's maybe primarily a lecture class, and you have to take an exam at the end of the semester. Do you have a plan for that? Okay. So overall, I'm a little uncomfortable with the word good listeners. Maybe we should change it to effective listeners. Good is a little more value than I want. So they ask questions, they answer questions, they provide some feedback, they offer their own perspective, and they can respond in many different ways. So what is important here on this continuum is, well, the listening responses are on a continuum, and they can be more or less reflective, meaning rather than the listener providing information, they feel that their job is to reflect or to show back to the speaker what they were saying. But when you get over to this side, it is it is very much not reflective, and it is more directive. Okay, so definitely silent listening, questioning, and paraphrasing are reflective. Definitely analyzing, evaluating, and advising are directive. I'd say that empathizing and supporting are kind of in the middle. So, this will obviously be the bulk of what we talk about in class. So, if you have questions on the different types of responses, definitely bring those questions to class. And then the last point, when you're trying to decide what response are you going to use, three things to think about. What's the problem that you are dealing with? What do you who's the other person, and what do they need in that situation? And what are you, if you are really bad at doing a supportive response, because your supportive response comes out to be they're there, things will be okay, maybe that's not a good response to use. Anyways, oops, I'm 1 minute over, but I'm pretty proud of myself for not going 15 minutes. So anyways, if you have questions, definitely go into the videos from the 15th edition, and then also put questions in the survey, and also bring your questions to class. All right, see you guys on Wednesday.